In the beginning, everything was simple late-night conversations, dreams they shared scribbled on scraps of paper. They spoke of forever, like a promise made beneath a sky full of stars, sealed with a kiss. Love was a journey, a refuge, a rescue. But as time went on, the conversations shifted from dreaming to numbers, from travel to taxes, from someday to we can't afford that right now. Their home no longer echoed with laughter, but with a heavy air of unresolved tension. Anna missed the tenderness of finding little love notes tucked into her lunch bag. Raj longed for silence after long days drowned in demanding work. They both remembered when compromise felt like unity, not like giving in. Now, disagreements lasted longer, apologies came slower, and understanding felt just out of reach. They came to understand that love wasn't a fairy tale, but a choice made daily quietly, and often when it was the hardest thing to do. Yet, after arguments, a hand would sometimes reach out for the other across a bed weighed down by sadness. Amid life's chaos, there were brief, precious moments, a glance, a smile, a shared memory that pulled them back together. Not the perfect storybook love they once imagined, but something real, weathered and strong. Raj bringing home Anna's favorite pastry after a hard day. Anna charging his phone before bed because he always forgot. The friction didn't disappear, but it softened. They stopped trying to win arguments and started trying to understand. It wasn't about being right, but being heard. Slowly, patience replaced pride, and grace found its way into the everyday. Their love evolved less fiery, more steady. Less about proving, more about showing up. Some days were still hard. Some nights still ended in silence. But they learned to return, to reach across the gap, to rebuild after each stumble. And in those quiet reconnections, they found a deeper intimacy. One not born of fantasy, but of resilience. A kind of knowing that only comes from seeing someone at their worst and choosing them anyway. They stopped chasing the version of love written in stories and started writing their own one full of missed appointments, inside jokes, burnt toast, held hands, shared burdens and hard-earned joy. The seasons shifted, and with them, so did the rhythm of their lives. Children came, and the house filled with new noise, laughter, crying, questions asked 100 times. The chaos was exhausting, but it anchored them in a shared purpose. Sleepless nights and messy mornings became the fabric of their partnership, stitched with fatigue and tenderness. There were moments they almost forgot each other in the swirl of responsibility. But then a song would play in the background, one from a road trip years ago, and they'd lock eyes and remember who they used to be. Not to mourn it, but to remind themselves that love hadn't vanished. It had just changed shape. Raj noticed the silver beginning to thread through Anna's hair, and thought she had never looked more beautiful. Anna watched him fumble with their daughter's ponytail, his hands too large and unsure, and felt a surge of affection she couldn't explain. They stopped chasing the high of the beginning and started honoring the depth of the middle, the loyalty built over years, the quiet companionship, the comfort of someone who had seen every version of you and stayed. Disagreements still came, but now they passed more quickly. They had learned the art of apology, the strength in vulnerability, the quiet heroism of choosing each other again and again without fanfare. Years slipped by almost unnoticed, not with fanfare but with the soft, persistent hum of routine. School pickups, doctor's appointments, family dinners that sometimes dissolved into silence or laughter or both. The extraordinary had been replaced by the deeply ordinary, but within it, they discovered a kind of quiet magic. They no longer needed to fill every silence. Some evenings were spent simply sitting side by side, sipping tea, lost in separate books. Yet, in those moments, their presence to each other felt louder than words. Intimacy, they learned, was not just in touch, it was in being known without needing to explain. Sometimes they would stumble across old photos, smiling, younger versions of themselves. And they'd smile, not with regret, but with a kind of reverence. They knew now what those two people didn't. That love, real love, is not held in the dazzling highs, but in the persistence through every low. Their children grew, left, returned, left again. The house quieted, echoing with memories. There were new aches, slower walks, forgotten names. Yet Raj still brought her tea the way she liked it. Anna still placed her hand on his back when they walked, guiding gently without words. The porch became their favorite place, a quiet witness to the life they had built. Seasons rolled past like pages, turning spring blooms softening into summer heat, autumn winds rustling through the trees, winter stillness wrapping the world in silence. They sat through them all, hand in hand, two figures in a world that no longer rushed them. Conversations slowed but never ceased. Sometimes they spoke of their early years, laughing at how naive they had been. Other times they sat in shared silence, full of the kind of understanding that didn't require words anymore. It wasn't about reliving the past. It was about holding it gently, with all its joy and failure, and knowing they had done their best. They had grown older, yes, but the years had carved something lasting into their bond, something softer than passion, more enduring than excitement. A sanctuary built from decades of shared days, layered with trust, forgiveness, and the quiet bravery of staying. When one of them fell ill, as one always does, eventually the other became caretaker, not out of obligation but devotion. There was no dramatic fear of loss, only a steady presence. Every pill given, every blanket tucked in, every gentle word was another line in the love story they had written across a lifetime. The house remained, still, weathered, filled with echoes of laughter in the hallway, of arguments that turned into understanding, of lullabies sung in the dark. Their photos stayed on the walls, smiling versions of a life lived fully, not perfectly. The scent of old books, her favorite scarf on the coat hook, the creak in the floorboard he always meant to fix, all pieces of a love that lingered. Children returned more often now, walking slower through the rooms. They noticed details they'd once ignored. The way the sunlight hit the kitchen at dusk, the worn cushion where he always sat, the notebook filled with her careful handwriting lists, memories, recipes never shared. They spoke softly, reverently, as if afraid to disrupt the peace that still lived in the walls. One grandchild, curious and wide-eyed, asked what kind of love they had. And the answer came not in a single story, but in all of them. In mismatched socks, anniversary cards scribbled in a rush, hospital visits, quiet apologies, dances in the kitchen when no one was looking. It was not a fairy tale, it was a lifetime. Years later, that same grandchild sat on the same porch, now grown, partner beside them, coffee warming their hands. They didn't try to replicate the past, but they remembered it. The way two people had chosen each other every day, even when it was hard, especially then. Time moved forward as it always does, but the story didn't end, it transformed. The house, still modest and full of history, became a place of gathering. Holidays drew family back like a tide. Stories were told again and again, never quite the same, each time deeper. She used to hum that tune while baking, someone would say. He never let anyone leave without a full tank of gas and a packed lunch, another would add, smiling. Their love became a presence more than a memory, woven into the rituals of those they left behind. A daughter stitched one of her mother's old dresses into a quilt. A son kept the porch light on every night, just like his father had. The smallest gestures held the deepest meaning. New relationships blossomed under the influence of that quiet legacy. Their grandchildren navigated love with a different map, not chasing perfect, but seeking real. They forgave more quickly, listened more intently, gave space for imperfection. Because they had seen what lasting love looked like, not polished, but patient, not flashy but full. And every so often, someone would return to that porch alone, sit in silence and just be, listening not for sound but for feeling, for the trace of two voices in the breeze, a shared laugh in the rustling leaves, the faint echo of a life built with intention, mistake, mercy, and deep affection. Years passed, then decades. The old house stood steady, vines curling around the porch rails, paint faded but proud. It was no longer just a home, it was a vessel of history, a keeper of moments too quiet for photographs. The new generations walked its halls with reverence, knowing they were stepping through the footsteps of something sacred. In time, the porch chairs were replaced, but one was always left empty, a quiet tribute. Children now brought their own children, pointing to the tree swing and saying, "That's where they sat every summer, just watching the world." And somehow, the breeze still felt warmer there, as if their presence remained, soft but unmistakable. Letters were found tucked into old books' short notes, never dramatic, just real. Dinner's in the oven, don't forget to smile today. I'm proud of you, even on the hard days. Words once mundane, now priceless. A museum of love dressed in the everyday. The family carried them forward not in grief, but in practice. They celebrated anniversaries not with champagne, but with acts of care. Making breakfast, folding laundry, checking in after a long day. They understood now that love was not one grand moment, but a million small ones stacked carefully, like stones in a river, worn smooth by time and effort. And on quiet evenings, when the house hushed and the stars appeared like witnesses to something ancient, someone might whisper into the night, "Thank you for teaching us." Eventually, even the last of those who remembered them firsthand grew old. The stories turned into soft folklore within the family, half-remembered details, corrected lovingly around dinner tables. No, it was cherry pie, not apple. He always wore that old navy sweater, remember? Truth blurred with tenderness, and no one minded. But the essence remained untouched. The youngest, a child with their eyes and her smile, wandered into the attic one rainy afternoon. Dust floated in beams of light as she opened an old wooden box, filled with photographs, faded letters, ticket stubs from long-forgotten dates. She ran her fingers over the edges of a photo, two people dancing barefoot in the kitchen, mid-laugh, caught in a moment that asked for nothing and gave everything. She brought it downstairs, cradled in both hands like a fragile heirloom. "Who are they?" she asked. And the stories began again, passed down like a torch, not heavy with sadness, but glowing with meaning. Each telling brought them back a little into the room, into the laughter, into the way someone held a partner's hand longer than necessary. Just because. Their love became a thread woven through generations, not instructive, but inspiring. Not loud but deeply rooted. It reminded each new heart that followed. You don't have to chase perfection. You only have to show up. Take kind. Try again tomorrow. One spring afternoon, long after the echoes had settled into the wood and the air, a celebration was held beneath the great oak in the backyard, the same tree that once shaded their quiet conversations, under which children had played, where vows were whispered decades ago. Now, another couple stood beneath its branches, nervous and glowing, exchanging promises of their own. They spoke not of perfect futures, but of honest ones. Of choosing each other in the chaos. Of listening more than speaking. Of staying even when staying was the harder choice. As the vows were spoken, older family members glanced toward the porch, where two empty chairs sat side by side, wrapped in ivy and dappled sunlight. They weren't just symbols now, they were sacred seats, reserved for the ones who taught them all how to love without spectacle, without conditions. When the ceremony ended, and the celebration unfolded in laughter and clinking glasses, a quiet moment settled like dusk. The breeze picked up gently, scattering petals and lifting the edges of an old photograph tucked into the guest book. It fluttered once before landing on the grass, two people, grinning wildly in the rain, soaked to the bone, holding on to each other like nothing else mattered. Someone picked it up and smiled. They'd have loved this, they said. And everyone nodded. Not because it was a grand occasion, but because it was real. It was full of the kind of love that endures, not through perfection or fantasy, but through every morning that begins again, every choice to stay, every quiet kindness offered with nothing expected in return. As twilight painted the sky in soft purples and golds, lanterns flickered to life around the old oak tree. Children danced barefoot in the grass, their laughter spiraling up into the dusk like music. The new couple, now quietly holding hands away from the crowd, watched the scene with wide eyes, so much ahead, so much unknown. But they weren't afraid. Not really. Because they had seen what was possible. Inside the house, the youngest child tiptoed into the living room, tracing her fingers along the spines of worn books and framed photographs. She paused at the mantel where a small box sat carved with initials, time-worn and simple. No one opened it anymore. They didn't need to. What it held had already been released into the lives they lived daily. Later, when the night was quiet and the party had faded into candle stubs and soft jazz from an old record player, the porch lights glowed gently against the dark. Someone had brought out 2 cups of tea, placed side by side on a table between the empty chairs. Quiet ritual now, always observed. Not superstition, not sorrow. Just respect. Just love. A breeze passed through, brushing the curtains and rustling the wind chimes, the same sound that once filled their evenings. The house exhaled, as if remembering, as if participating. And in that moment you could almost feel them there. Not as ghosts, not even as memories, but as a presence stitched into the air, into the traditions carried forward, into the way love was now practiced and taught. Because the greatest stories are not those that end. They are the ones that become a part of others, retold not with words but with actions. Hand held during loss. A note left on the counter. Choice to stay. Again and again and again. In that house, in that family. Their love had not only endured, it had become eternal.